globalization often arrives with an unpleasant side effect: increasing inequality. People lose jobs through outsourcing and the increased migration of foreign workers. Globalization also increases the roster of competitive companies, and when they duke it out, only the strongest companies with the best technology survive. As a result, the world's wealth increasingly concentrates at the top. Oxfam reports that in 2011, 388 people controlled more money than the poorest half of the world's population. Just 5 years later, that wealth had concentrated into the hands of only 62 people. This year, Oxfam estimates that just 8 super-rich people have more money than all the money owned by the poorest half of the entire world's population. This problem of inequality is real. Movements like Occupy Wall Street and Fighting Inequality Alliance express frustration and strategize solutions. They argue that a large, secure middle class is the backbone of a strong and growing economy. But others argue that a rising tide lifts all boats, and that people are more likely to ignore these inequalities if they can see their own incomes rising. However, evidence suggests that overall, the tide is no longer lifting all boats. In advanced economies like the United States, Western Europe, and Japan, a general increase in wealth among the middle class is becoming less common. In a study of 25 of the world's most advanced economies, the McKinsey Global Institute found that almost 70% of households have experienced flat or falling incomes in the last decade. This is quite a change from the 1950s through the 90s, when most children could expect to make higher incomes than their parents. Many of those who sense this lack of progress and opportunity for their children have turned their frustration on the very idea of globalization and expressed negative opinions about free trade and open immigration policies. Sensitive to these negative voter opinions, politicians turn inward to help ensure jobs don't leave the country. They lock down borders, decrease the number of work visas, and punish companies for not using local labor. Unfortunately, this solution only makes things worse. History has repeatedly shown that protectionism leads to slower overall growth and decreases the competitiveness of nations engaged in such policies. For example, the Smoot-Hawley tariff of 1930 increased tariffs on foreign goods from less than 20% to nearly 60%. The tariffs worked. Imports to the United States fell by over 60%. Buying foreign products became too expensive, so people had to buy American. This seemed like a great idea at first, but in retaliation, other countries raised their own tariffs as well, and a global trade war began. The world GDP dropped 14%, and the trade wars worsened an already depressed global economy. These sentiments and actions sound hauntingly familiar today. So rather than follow this same path of blocking trade and banning immigration, thereby slowing growth, advanced economies like the U.S. might be better served by finding ways to address the problem of extreme wealth inequality and encourage reasonable sharing in the global marketplace. To do that, companies and governments must work together to improve their competitiveness and make the world more, not less, global. This needs to be done in a way that will help transition and retrain workers who are being displaced, nudging them to areas of growth, which in the U.S. include sectors such as healthcare, information technology, automobiles, energy, farming, education, and financial services. To help workers transition to better jobs, governments and companies may focus on 3 initiatives. The first is to revive growth through increased innovation. The second is to improve transitions from education to employment. And the third is to adjust taxes, raising disposable incomes for low and middle-income households.